Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, Travel in the Age of COVID-19, How Our Trips Are Going, presented by Corbin Hawkins, Renata Haas, and Drew McCarthy. Thank you all so much for being here today. Corbin, I'm going to hand things off to you.
Yeah, Kendall, thanks for having us once again. It's always a pleasure to work with you here. We're going to move right into it, but first I just wanted to get a little better sense of who we're talking to. So Drew is an expedition leader. Drew, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And once again, good to have you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks, Corbin. Again, my name's Drew McCarthy. I'm one of the expedition leaders with Natural Habitat Adventures. I've been working with Natural Habitat since 2017. I lead trips in Yellowstone, both in the summer and the winter. I lead trips in Greenland, and I've been involved in the trips that just were completed in Yellowstone this past summer and fall.
Awesome, thank you. And Renata, Renata is our head of field staff, which uniquely positions her kind of at the forefront of all of this COVID to do. So at Nat Hab here, we've got a big protocol, the COVID protocol. We've been talking about it, and Renata has really been largely responsible for that. So Renata, why don't you share with us a little more about your role, and then we'll just hop right into what that protocol and what all this means.
Fantastic. Yeah, I have been working with Natural Habitat Adventures for over 7 years now, and have worn a variety of hats. Always on the operations team, but I've done everything from in-field operations in our programs in Churchill, overseeing the logistics for quite a number of trips within North America and Greenland, and have developed risk management protocol for all of those programs, and now oversee all of our field staff. So that is our expedition leaders globally and all of our field operations staff worldwide. So with the experience that I've had developing risk management protocol in a normal everyday circumstance, took the lead on developing our COVID-19 protocol that we utilize now as we are operating trips.
Cool. So, let's talk a bit about what that means. As we, building up to this, I keep forgetting the term that you like to use, the combined approach. So basically, what you've come up with is a protocol that looks at any and all possible factors in relation to preventative measures for COVID-19. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with us what those factors are, and then we can talk a little bit of how you came to those conclusions.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Natural Habitat, our protocols focus on a combination intervention approach. We have learned that the optimal way to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 virus transmission is to use a combination of interventions. These controls can provide an additional degree of protection even if one intervention fails or is not available. So the first control that we use is respiratory hygiene. First and foremost, that means wearing a face covering and making sure that you are covering your mouth if, let's say, you were to cough or to sneeze. That also includes making sure that we are looking at ventilation in any inside area that we're at. So the next control is going to be hand hygiene. The most basic component of hand hygiene is ensuring that you are washing your hands frequently and thoroughly. We all saw this at the start of COVID-19 when the main message was ensure that you are washing your hands. So making sure on our trips that we're providing ample opportunity for people to wash their hands, and also providing hand sanitizer that's at least 60% alcohol if hand washing is not available. And the next control is physical distancing. So when we are, the main aspect of physical distancing is maintaining at least 6 feet away apart from any individual that you are near that is not within your own home. So we practice that as much as possible. If for some reason a guest is not able to physical distance, that's where that face covering comes in.
Right.
And then finally, the last component of our control is enhanced sanitation. So mostly what this means is frequent cleaning and disinfecting of high touch or shared surfaces to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 through infected droplets on surfaces.
Okay, so you've boiled it down pretty simply here, right? We've got 4 pillars essentially to this mitigation, and it's all nice and it's clean and we like the way it looks, but it wasn't such an easy task putting these together, if I recall, through conversations with you before today.
Yeah, it was a project. So first and foremost, this could not be done by one person. We decided to put a whole team together to attack every component of the project of developing these protocols. We where we still meet at least once a week, call our team the COVID task force. And our main goal was to research COVID-19 mitigation tactics and determine how to develop specific protocol that could be adapted to all of the trips that we would be running. There's a few components of how we went through this process. First and foremost, this team had to take quite a bit of time and do the research. So we researched recommendations from the Center of Disease Control and World Health Organization to develop the skeleton of our protocols. Once we had that skeleton and we had a good idea of what we needed to really dig into, we felt it was really necessary to collaborate, and we had many discussions with other experts in the adventure and outdoor travel industry to share those best practices. And that's because we had to look into every single component of the trip, and with each aspect of the trip determine what is the best way to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 using this combination intervention approach. After we took some time, collaborated with our other companies that were creating these protocols, we then needed to determine how we were going to work with every single partner that we work with in the field. So this is from individual presenters that talk to a group, to every single restaurant and hotel that we work with. We needed to find a way to be able to vet each of our vendors and partners to ensure that they were either meeting our standards for protocols or they were exceeding it. If for some reason, let's say a restaurant or hotel was not abiding by one aspect that we really needed to see them use, we then had to go and work with that restaurant or hotel to make sure that they were altering their protocols to meet our standards. After working with our partners, we needed to develop a screening process. And this screening process was to screen both our guests and expedition leaders before the trip and on the trip. So this includes a temperature a daily temperature and daily symptoms check. Along with doing those daily symptom and temperature checks, we worked with United Healthcare Global to develop our protocol if a guest was showing symptoms that might be associated with COVID. The protocol surrounding contacting the team of doctors that we work with to conduct a virtual health assessment to evaluate those symptoms, and then provide the next best step for our guests. After screening, we then needed to develop a training plan. It's really, really important that even though we're creating these protocols behind the scenes, that this information is getting very clearly disseminated to our expedition leaders that are going to be working with our guests in the field, and our operations staff that are really going to be the front line to ensuring that these protocols are followed to the level that we're looking at. So we designed a really intensive training plan. And finally, we needed to ensure that our guests understood what our protocol is and set expectations so that they knew what to expect. The fact that we will be wearing masks in vehicles, for example. So we made sure to share protocol with guests prior to the start of the trip. We have all of that information on our website as well. And then we also wanted to make sure that we were sending guests the tools that they could use to participate in mitigating their own risk. So before a guest even came on a trip, they were sent KN95 face masks, a wind and face shield that can be utilized as a face covering, individual hand sanitizers, as well as sanitary wipes. So from the moment you leave your home and get ready for this adventure, you have everything that you need to mitigate your risk moving forward on that trip, and you are informed on the best steps to take. So that wraps up the basic steps on how we developed the protocol to get our trips back up and running again and get people out there.
Yeah, and we appreciate all that work. You've been doing this since, I mean, I guess you started this even as early as February, right? When you're kind of seeing how this COVID trend was going. What would you say that your biggest challenge in creating this has been, if you could pick one single thing?
Biggest challenge. I would say that the biggest challenge that we found was making sure that we're really setting the appropriate expectations to our guests. I think within the United States, there's a few different directions that we're seeing people take regarding how to best mitigate mitigate the risk of getting COVID. And we thought it was very important that we continue, even though we've talked a little bit less about washing hands, we're really focusing on masks right now, that our guests really need to know that we are taking a combination intervention approach and just continuing to be really clear on that messaging and making sure that we are giving guests that information right from the forefront to ensure that they have everything they need. I would also say that just making sure we are on top of the latest developments in how COVID spreads and ensuring that we are adapting our protocols to that. We saw quite a bit of changes in information at the start of this, so part of our protocol that is in place is to ensure that we are adapting our protocol to changes in information, changes in resources. So it's a continuing evolving beast.
I'm sure. And I've seen this document, guys. It's massive. It's some 18 pages long. A lot of work went into this, and it's comprehensive. It covers anything that we might struggle with or come across in the field worldwide. Correct, Renata? This is meant to kind of be an umbrella protocol for all the trips we run, whether it's in Kenya or monarch butterflies in Mexico, or where we've already seen it applied here in Yellowstone.
That's correct. We chose the combination intervention approach because this can apply to all of the trips that we run globally. It is the case that we might have to make some specific adaptations depending on where we are going. But yes, that's the brilliant component of it, is that it can adapt to every location.
Great. Well, it's nice that you mentioned guest expectations and how we've really worked hard to say the right things and just really paint a picture for what these trips are going to be like. Now, Drew, you and I are fortunate enough to have experienced this firsthand in Yellowstone over the summer. So I'm going to switch to you for a minute and just kind of chat on what that looks like. What does a Nat Hab trip look like in the time of COVID?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think I'm sort of uniquely positioned to talk about this for a couple of reasons. One is I've played both roles in these trips as expedition leader and also as the operations staff. And I caught myself almost saying behind the scenes, but in these trips, our operations staff are really not behind the scenes. They really become an integrated part of the team, and it really adds a lot of benefit to the trip. Another reason I'm uniquely positioned is that I live here. So the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is where is my home. So I live in eastern Idaho. That's where I'm coming to you from today. So I have my finger on the pulse of what's happening in these communities that directly surround Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park. I wanted to mention that I feel a little strange giving this presentation without gloves on and a mask because I'm sort of in guide mode now, and it feels really weird to be not speaking through a mask. It really becomes second nature after a while. And wearing gloves as well just became part of being in this role, and so I feel a little off here. So forgive me. But I wanted to mention. What's that, Corbin?
I was going to say, it seems you shed your antlers a little early this year as well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. So I wanted to talk about this image that we're looking at here. This is Sophie Mazawita and myself on the last trip that we led this last summer. And I wanted to point out that before the trips even started, all the expedition leaders went through a pretty extensive training on our COVID protocols. So for Sophie and myself, that meant traveling to Louisville, undergoing the training to understand how this will happen in the field, and working with Renata and others to make sure that we were all set to go. Also, there was a lot of PPE and a lot of gear that we had to learn how to implement properly in the field to make these trips be safe and have the same level of quality from what we hope to give and have given in the past. In some cases, even added extra levels of quality that were unexpected. So let's move to that next slide.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of one of the biggest questions that we get when people are coming on these trips is, what is the vehicle situation, right? When we're supposed to be distancing, you're supposed to then hop into a vehicle with other people. I think that raises a lot of flags. So what have we been doing in the field to mitigate?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So what we're looking at here is one of our North American safari trucks, and these are the vehicles that we use for our Yellowstone and Grand Teton trips. So first of all, I can't tell you how wonderful it was to have only 5 guests in a vehicle. So our trips are limited to 10 participants. Each van has only 5 people. Generally, we would have 7. So all I can say is there is just so much more space, and that really adds to comfort. It adds to just the overall experience, the access to windows. So a lot more space in the vehicles. We were requiring that our guests wore masks while inside the vehicle, and that also includes the expedition leaders. So from my standpoint, I was always providing a lot of interpretation through the PA, and I was concerned before these trips started that possibly it would be muffled, it'd be hard to hear, but that wasn't the case at all. In fact, if anything, I was thinking more. I was trying to speak more clearly and be a little bit more planned in my interpretation as a result. Also, I could hear questions from the guests, no problem. Keep in mind that we do have the windows open while we're traveling. That did create a little bit of additional noise, but it didn't impact interpretation. It didn't impact ability to hear questions. So lots of room to spread out. Our guests would stay in the same vehicle throughout the trip and stay in the same seat throughout the trip. So in some cases, when appropriate, you could leave some equipment in the vehicle overnight, which was a big benefit instead of having to switch vehicles. We had caddies in the vehicle in front of the seat where the passenger was sitting. So hand sanitizer was in those caddies. tissues, garbage disposal, really made it a personalized space for that particular guest. And then behind the scenes with the vehicles, deep cleaned every single night. So that meant that there was a deep clean that was happened by our operations staff. And in some cases, it would mean that the guides would be swapping all their gear out in the evenings and then rotating to the other vehicle the following day. That way that our guests could get the equal interpretation from each of the guides and expedition leaders without having to move their gear themselves. I'll mention that when stopped, we would open up the hatches, we'd open up the doors, we'd open up the sliding doors. This is something we always do. It's one of the biggest benefits to these vehicles in terms of wildlife viewing. But in terms of safety during COVID, that was just greater ventilation, greater air exchange within the cabin of the vehicle. And the last thing I'll say that really changed is because we weren't able to share resources as much within the vehicle, say we weren't able to pass around field guides, we just looked for more opportunities to stop and in some cases get out, in other cases just talk with each other inside the vehicle without the vehicle being moving down the road.
Yeah, and you had mentioned a few seconds ago, everyone kind of has their own little space within a van, and they have their little car kit, so to speak. They've got their own hand sanitizer, excuse me, they've got their own Kleenex. They also get their own binoculars, right? So everyone's got a pair of binoculars, and that's kind of a nice little treat to be able to call that your own for the trip. But when we stop and we get out of the vans, then we start to use group equipment, right? So things like scopes or things that we don't necessarily carry enough of per guest. So what are we doing in that regard when we've got guests interacting with our group equipment?
Sure. I mean, that was one of my biggest concerns when I started piecing together in my own mind how these trips might play out, because they are gear intensive. And we do want to minimize the sharing of equipment, make sure that any equipment that is shared is properly cleaned. So we do spend a lot of time outside the vehicles, and really from a risk management standpoint, as an expedition leader, I'm always opening the vehicle's doors for the guests. First of all, it's just a great added level of service, but most importantly, it ensures that you're getting out in a safe spot. In times of COVID, the expedition leaders were always treating their hands with hand sanitizer before opening and closing the doors, and we were the only people to be opening and closing the doors. This was just to minimize the number of hands on a given frequently touched surface. Once we were out of the vehicle, you mentioned that every guest was provided their own pair of binoculars. We've done that in the past, but for these trips, the binoculars were sort of assigned to the guest, and they were that guest kept those binoculars in their possession for the course of the trip. But shared gear like spotting scopes or trekking poles, all that was handled by the guide. So if it was anything food related, say coolers of drinks, or say hot drinks like hot cocoa or tea, coffee, we would always glove up, and expedition leaders would do all that distribution of cold drinks or hot drinks. In terms of trekking poles, we would wipe those trekking poles down. In terms of spotting scopes are a pretty important part of our trip. And in areas where we were stopped for a long time, for a long duration of time, we had enough spotting scopes to set those up for each individual party, sanitize the scope, and then have an individual or a family, for instance, on a scope and stay on that scope. When the guides would then adjust the scope to what's being seen, we would use hand sanitizer whenever we'd adjust focus or whenever we would adjust the position of the scope itself. Now, in terms of short stops, or if we wanted to take advantage of some technology, we would use what was called phone scoping, where we would actually attach a phone or a camera to a spotting scope. And this had a couple great advantages. One big advantage was it allowed a small group of people to view what was happening through the scope on the screen. Another advantage is it would help guests orient with their binoculars as to what we were looking at. So it might be difficult to describe in a distance, where that particular wolf is. But with the phone scoping, the guests could look, oh yeah, it's behind that aspen tree, and then they could use their own binoculars to orient and view the wildlife that we were viewing. All that's done without having to touch another piece of equipment, which is excellent. The last big advantage to phone scoping is the ability to take video and to take photos and then share that information in the moment. So instead of having to have a guest put their own phone up against the scope and run that risk of touching a surface that had been touched by another person, we could airdrop or use Bluetooth technology to share that image in the moment. And this is a great example.
This was just the summary, and you were able to get this image across to all of your guests rather immediately.
Absolutely, yeah. So this photo was taken on one of the trips that just happened in just weeks ago. This was a trip I led with Gene Lawrence, and this grizzly was right on the opposite bank of the Yellowstone River. It had just killed an elk and hauled that elk several days prior to the opposite bank. And we were able to capture these images from a distance with the phone scope and then share those images immediately using Bluetooth technology. Also, the one thing I want to say about this as well is that it was quite crowded. So a lot of people were in the area to view this amazing sight of a grizzly on an elk that had just killed. But because of our knowledge of the area, and because of this phone scoping technology, we were able to distance ourselves from the group safely and not only have a better experience viewing this bear, but also have an uninterrupted experience because we weren't around so many people and cars.
Which is a problem in Yellowstone, right? This is a pretty classic image that we see here. If you Google Old Faithful, you're going to come across a photo very similar to this with throngs of people lining up to watch Old Faithful go off. It's an American icon. It's what we've come to expect with 4+ million visitors a year in Yellowstone. But we've kind of found a way to get away from the crowds. Our goal is to separate ourselves and find some time throughout the day to avoid this exact situation that we're looking at. So how have you been able to accomplish that in the field?
Well, really, it comes down to flexibility. The way our itineraries are designed and the way they've always been designed allow the expedition leaders to be out in the field with the group for the duration of the day, and in some cases overnight as well, if we're staying, at Old Faithful as an example. So partially, we're just choosing times to go onto the boardwalks when we know that there'll be fewer people. But sometimes we're at a particular feature that we do want to, say, for instance, view an eruption of Grand Geyser, which erupts on a relatively frequent basis. One thing we did last summer was we actually brought our own chairs, our field chairs, out onto the boardwalks and in a safe spot away from the Park Service installed viewing platforms like you see in this image. We would set up our own chairs, and that way people could experience that waiting for that geyser to erupt without having to be uncomfortably close to a crowded area.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that we're still going to hit the big spots, right? This is the lower falls of the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone. It's a must-see when you visit, and it's going to be busy, kind of regardless of time, as you know. And I think it really comes down to just following this protocol. It's as simple as that, and you still get to experience Yellowstone, right?
Absolutely. I mean, again, part of the beauty of joining a natural habitat trip to Yellowstone or Grand Teton or anywhere in the world is that the expedition leaders, they really know the areas, and we're able to go to the frequently visited spots during times when there's not a lot of people, but then also utilize lesser known geyser basins, lesser known overlooks, areas that we might utilize even before COVID, just to get a more intimate and personal experience of the resource. Now, this is a great example of a group from last summer. There was a couple that was together, traveling together, and then another couple that was not in the travel party. So in those instances, they'd wear masks, like in this view of the falls of the canyon of the Yellowstone River. But then this next image, these experiences that we're all used to having on Nat Hab trips, we're still having those experiences. We're still able to set up these great photo opportunities. We're still able to really sit for 20 minutes and view Grand Geyser erupt, Castle Geyser erupt, and listen and experience the mist, hear the sounds of the rushing water, as we always have. And one thing, I took this photo with my own personal phone and airdropped this image in the moment to those guests after I took that photo of them, because they were traveling together. They didn't need to be masked up.
And a lot of times when we're in the park, on any trip, if you've traveled with us before, you know that we like to bring in local presenters. It's a part of our ethos to kind of support the local community. And in the case of COVID, a lot of those are inside, so we've adapted to some outdoor arrangements. So this is Dan Hartman. He's a local presenter in Cook City, Montana. This is on a trip this summer, actually. So you can see we're all spread out. Everybody's got their masks on still, but it seems that you've really enjoyed the benefits of being outside during these presentations and meals alike, Drew.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's sort of, you know, when you've been leading these trips for long enough, you sort of get into a routine that you know works really well. And a presenter like Dan Hartman, you know, I've worked with him for years, and he's always mixing up his presentations. But it was really interesting to see how just that change in venue, instead of presenting inside his own family cabin, by setting up outdoors, it kind of freshened up Dan. You could tell he was ready to do something different. So his content changed, but obviously the setting was quite different. This particular presentation, that wood pile, he often talks a lot about pine marten that live in his wood pile. In fact, Dan Hartman's sort of known for, in the world of photography, for being able to set up good photos of pine martens here at his house site. When you're inside the cabin, it's always a matter of, well, we might catch a glimpse of it out the window. But as this presentation closed this season, walking back down the hill, that pine marten showed itself. We would have never experienced that had we been in the cabin as we had in the past. The other thing I want to mention about all the local presenters that we used on these trips this last summer, they were just thrilled to have groups back out there. They love what they do. They love educating our guests. And, you know, I think a lot of people were unsure about what would happen this summer. I think we were all very unsure about what happened this summer, but we were able to create these environments like here, what's pictured in this video here. Many of our presenters ended up presenting in an outdoor setting. We were able to spread out enough where we didn't need to wear masks while outdoors. And it also just added something to the presentation. So much more powerful to be in the resource when someone's presenting about the resource than in a conference room in a hotel.
Yeah, absolutely. And Drew, I'm going to kind of move ahead here, but kind of in conjunction with our changing the space for our presenters, we've also had to change the space for a lot of our meals, which means that we're eating outside quite frequently. And if you can see in these next couple of images here, there's really a silver lining when it comes to these meals in the field. Typically, we're eating in a park restaurant or park accommodation restaurant or somewhere in Cook City or wherever the locale is, we're eating inside. But I think we've really kind of found something that I hope continues beyond the age of COVID, where we can have these outdoor meals in these beautiful settings like we see here.
Well, and having the additional field staff to have a dedicated operations person that's with us every day of the trip made these meals possible. And you know, having played that role on one of the trips, you know, setting up tables early in the morning before the guests arrive and having elk walk down into the fields with their calves and begin feeding, just indescribable to share that with guests as they arrive for a meal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think suffice to say that, you know, there's a lot of positives we can pull from this, and all the protocol and the changes that we've had to make, we've been able to adjust our trips for the better. But ultimately, I think the beauty of all of this is that we're still running a trip. You know, we still get to see the beauty of all this. We're still running Nat Hab trips. We're still out there. We're still seeing what places like Yellowstone has to offer. We just have to do it a bit differently. So I guess my next question for you, Drew, is, you know, we've kind of talked about what we're doing differently and what guests can expect when they come on one of our trips, some of the technology that we're using to mitigate these COVID risks. But I would like to hear from your point of view, being local and spending so much time in the park, how has travel changed in your kind of greater Yellowstone ecosystem? What trends have you seen, and what things are moving, so to speak, that are different now than they were even in July or March?
Well, I think this whole pandemic has caught us all in unexpected ways. I can say that in the local communities that surround Yellowstone, people were prepared for an incredibly slow summer. I mean, both Yellowstone National Park and Grand Teton National Park early in the season were closed for obvious reasons. Many of the restaurants, many of the companies that work like Natural Habitat in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem in Grand Teton Park and Yellowstone, I think we're prepared to really have quite a slow summer. And in the end, actually the opposite ended up happening, I think really truly to the surprise of these communities. So we had a slow start, and then it ramped up to a record-setting fall season. So both Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Park broke visitation records for the month of October. And then we just saw those trends increase. So the first trip I led was 4th of July. And it was a busy weekend because it was a holiday weekend, but in general, the park was quiet for summer, and really saw those numbers increase. But in response, I was really impressed to see how our partners in the field, as well as the agencies like the Park Service, adapted to these increases in numbers. And one really interesting adaptation I saw the Park Service do, many of the boardwalks, they modified so that they were one-way boardwalks only. This is something that I hope they keep, because keeping the traffic moving in one direction not only is safer for COVID, but it also just allows you to have a less crowded experience. Speaking about some of our partners, I noticed that many of the hotels where we stay got better at making sure everybody was wearing masks, everybody at the front desks, everybody in the housekeeping staff, all the servers, regardless of local regulations, were fully masked up and being very careful and cautious. And I saw it get better as the season progressed. I saw an increase in staffing at restaurants and in hotels, which was impressive to see. Finally, local governments were really receptive and responsive. Teton County, Wyoming instituted a mask mandate early on, and offered a lot of resources to restaurants and to shops that were dealing with uncomfortable situations where they had purveyors that weren't wearing masks. So there was a lot of work with those restaurants and with those purveyors to help mitigate any conflict that related to being open and requiring mask use in those establishments.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it was a success story, albeit a small sample size, but you saw those changes and you saw people really moving towards getting things back to some semblance of normalcy, right? For those listening, I hope you appreciated just some of the eye candy in Yellowstone that we've just gone through. Nothing specific to note there, but I do want to bring it back to Renata now and just talk about larger travel trends. So we've talked with Drew about excuse me, what we've made changes and challenges we've faced in the field, a little bit about what the local community where Drew works has seen as far as travel trends and changes go. But Renata, I wanted to ask you same question, but on a larger scale. Let's open the doors a little bit and look worldwide and just kind of see what you've noticed in all of your research to build this protocol. Some of the cool things, maybe there's some creative innovations, or there's some ideas that you're tossing around in order to match this changing industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that just overall, people want to travel and destinations want to have people come and visit. So it is the challenge for everyone, not just us, but for the countries and the various parks that we want to go visit, is how do we get there and mitigate risk to make it a viable option for everyone. So it's no longer the case of no, you cannot go. It's no longer black and white. It's, as Corbin mentioned, these creative innovations. How can we bring people to these spots? I think a really good local example, depending on where you are, but I am from our office in Colorado and in Boulder, and we saw main streets shut down in a lot of different areas to be able to expand that outdoor restaurant space. So instead of having, maybe there would be 1 or 2 tables outside where a couple could get lunch or dinner, we're seeing that expanded to being able to seat more people comfortably, socially distanced. And we're seeing that across the board in how people approach travel and what they're willing to work with us on. For example, a rafting company might allow less people on a boat. So we anticipate seeing more of this as we head into the winter, for example. So dining is on a lot of people's mind. People still want to be able to get out and have a nice dinner. How do you do that when the temperature is colder? So we'll likely see restaurants adding more heaters to those outdoor seating areas. We're currently working on our winter programming to understand how do we create an outdoor eating, a comfortable outdoor eating space when it's colder out. Do we get portable heaters? So we are excited for that challenge because as we've mentioned throughout this conversation, these innovations haven't just been solutions to the problem of COVID and being able to travel, but they've actually been innovations that will allow us to run better trips and have a much more exciting experience for guests in the future. So we're really looking forward to be able to utilize these changes that we've made on our trip in the future. I think we are also going to see more countries be willing to open up to Americans, specifically without the quarantine that we're seeing right now. We see a lot of countries that have a 14-day quarantine, but with the advancements that we are seeing in testing, we are going to see more countries open up. At this point, as long as guests are able to get tested, and we're also seeing that different countries that we are working with or different locations that we're going to are going to really demand more of their staff. In Kenya, for example, they are making sure that all of their staff get a certification in COVID safety, so that they really understand how to mitigate that risk. So we're excited to see those travel trends because we know everybody is really itching to get out there and continue to explore.
And we've got you guys out there working, tirelessly to make sure that we're keeping up with current science and we're following these trends, whether it's in the office doing the stuff that allows us to be in the field, or whether it's in the field where we're trying to adapt these things that we've learned to what we do when we're guiding. Ultimately, I think that COVID is a larger conversation, right? I mean, we're dealing with a pretty niched area on how to deal with it. But I think it's worth noting that we're paying attention, right? All the time that we're spending in regards to COVID is how can we be the best at mitigating these risks, and how can we be the best at getting people back out and doing what they love. And there's a lot to be learned, whether it's personally, whether it's as a traveler or as a company, there's still a lot of growth happening. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, there's more to come as far as the Nat Hab COVID protocol goes, and we're going to just keep listening. But I think at this point, due to our short time here, I hope we've addressed most everything we wanted to, but I think it's time that we open the door to some questions from the listeners here and see if we can kind of answer any burning questions.
Great, thank you, Corbin. We do have a ton of questions for you guys, so we'll get to as many as we can by the top of the hour. And just a reminder, if we don't have time to get to your question today, you can always send us an email or give us a call, and we'd be happy to address your concerns. Okay, first question. So we've seen and heard a lot about our summer Yellowstone trip and how it went, but for those booked on the winter trips, what might we expect?
I think I can start that off with what we can expect COVID protocol-wise, and maybe Drew, if you want to jump into what we can expect to see nature-wise. So we will actually be lowering the number of individuals that are on that trip to 10 guests per trip. We're going to continue with the 2 vehicles. We're still going to be using our Nat Hab safari trucks. And also with that comes reducing the number of individuals on the snow coaches that we utilize. So we will be seeing sort of a switch. If we're moving to indoor dining spaces, we will be looking at having private dining rooms where everyone is able to keep social distancing while eating. We are adapting to find ways to be able to still have those field meals, and just moving into the colder climate. But Drew, I'd love for you to expand on what we plan to see on those winter trips and what the wildlife focus is as well.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, Yellowstone in the winter has always been my favorite time to visit because the colder temperatures really enhance the visual contrast for the wildlife that we'll be seeing. So obviously bison, obviously elk, many of the animals that were highlighted in some of the images in this presentation, thermal features are spectacular in the winter. So the colder temperatures really allow for those features to be so much more dramatic. An eruption of Old Faithful on a cold, calm day at -1 or 2 degrees is something you'll never forget. This column looks like it's traveling to the space station. It's incredible. But it's also less crowded. Yellowstone in general, Grand Teton is an incredible experience during the winter because COVID or no COVID, there's just very few other travelers out there. That's true for the restaurants as well. So being able to have tables spread out in restaurants and grouping families, individual travelers into their own table distributed throughout an open dining room will probably be a tool that we utilize in addition to some private dining spaces. I also just wanted to address the snow coaches. You know, the snow coaches in general are almost bigger than our safari trucks, so they typically have more seating than a Sprinter van. And so it's with only 5 people on the guide, being able to spread out in that space. Snow coaches have windows that you can crack, so ventilation is not going to be an issue in the snow coaches. In fact, they generally run so hot because the heaters are pumping the whole time that you want to keep those windows cracked, even in a non-COVID environment. So, you know, snow coach, these companies are devoted to providing a safe transportation option for their customers. And so you can expect the snow coach experience to be very similar to our time in our safari trucks. And really the viewing of the wildlife from the snow coaches and the viewing of the thermal features from the boardwalks in the park is just unforgettable during the winter months.
Okay, and how might protocols differ on different trips outside of the U.S.? This person in particular is talking about going to see the butterflies in Mexico.
Excellent. So still utilizing the combination intervention approach. So that component of the protocol is not going to change. You're still going to be, we're still going to be approaching it in that direction. For monarchs specifically, we actually have been diving deep into that protocol recently. We'll still be seeing less people in vehicles and more time outside. But other than sort of how we really approached the Yellowstone season, it's going to be quite a similar approach, which is again, the whole point of developing this combination intervention approach to protocols so that we can utilize the same technique in any destination.
And I think it's important to note that we're looking at the local regulations, local protocols, and we're basing our decisions off of the science that's been done to come up with those in those areas. And I would even say that our protocol goes even a step beyond as far as being risk averse goes. And you know, we take what these local governments are saying and we apply it to how we operate in the field.
Great. Along those same lines, there was a question about we do require COVID tests prior to the start of the trip, but there's some traveling involved, obviously, to get to the first location. So what do we do once guests get there? Do we conduct other COVID tests? Do we monitor temperatures? What's put in place once a person travels to the first destination?
So that is actually going to depend on the requirements of the destination. As I said before, when we developed this protocol, noting that it will change. At this point, we do not require guests to get tested before they depart. We recommend it, but it will be at this point the decision of the destination. So Kenya is a great example. We actually have a trip that is starting today, and Kenya requires that you depart the US with a negative PCR COVID test that you got 96 hours before departing. So with that trip specifically, guests are required to get that test before departing, and then once they arrive, there's no additional tests that are needed. However, again, they're still abiding by that combination intervention approach. So they're still wearing face masks indoors or when you can't social distance, ensuring that you're washing your hands frequently. That is still very much in place. The one great thing about that we're seeing as we move forward in time is that there are more and more companies that are working to provide testing with a quicker turnaround. We all know that when we really got to the height of the summer, it could be taking up to 10 days to get results back from tests. Now we're seeing that you can call in to get a test, a PCR test sent to your home, and then you can administer the test yourself and then send it back, so you don't have to actually drive to a location. So as we see advancements in testing, we're also going to see advancements in the time that it takes to get those results.
And we're still monitoring health checks. You know, with any Nat Hab trip, in the morning you're going to get your temperature taken. You're going to run through a symptom list. So regardless of what trip you're on, if you are required to take a test or not, there will be symptom checks every morning for every guest and guide, for that matter. Just keeping up with how you're feeling and noting any changes in those symptoms, and then moving forward from there.
And this may just be conjecture as far as your answer goes, but once a vaccine is developed and becomes available, will protocols change?
Well, again, our protocols were designed to change. So hopefully at some point we are able to fully go back to normal traveling. But it is very, very important that we monitor all of the science. If there is a vaccine, what does that look like? And that we monitor our protocols to adjust to the new data and what is available. So yes, we will absolutely be monitoring our protocols as testing requirements get quicker, as testing becomes more available, as a vaccine becomes available. It is the base of our protocol is to be able to adjust.
Yeah, I might add that, you know, I heard from multiple expedition leaders that were involved in these Yellowstone and Grand Teton trips this summer and fall that many of the techniques that we're using to stay safer in a COVID environment we'll continue using. I mean, I think that the chances are, is particularly leading trips in the winter, all the hand washing, all the attention to respiratory hygiene, the cleaning of frequently touched surfaces, that'll all just become part of what's a normal way to lead a trip.
A popular question is, after these Yellowstone trips have run now, have any clients or staff developed COVID as a result?
At this point, no, we have not had anyone contract COVID on our trips, no.
Great. And another question that has come up a few times is, has all of these protocols, have they increased the price of trips?
No, we have not increased the price of our trips to adapt these protocols.
Great. And the last question I'll take today before I hand it back to you guys for closing comments is, are there opportunities now with Nat Hab to do private trips? Say, if you just wanted to travel with your family, or you wanted to get a group of your close friends together and travel just alone in a private departure, is that available to us?
Absolutely. We are we actually have a program called Make It Private, where you can take a program and you can take that departure and put it just for whether you just want to travel with your spouse or you want to travel with your siblings, friends, extended family. You can make those trips private, so it is just you and the individuals that you want to travel with. I will note that this, as we open to more destinations, we'll be able to open that and make it private to those additional destinations as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all so much. This was incredibly useful and beneficial. I know a lot of people are really happy you guys were able to present to us today. So I'm going to hand things back to you guys for closing comments, and we'll start with Drew.
Well, first off, I just want to say how privileged I feel to have been able to speak today to you all about my experiences leading trips this summer. Equally, I feel very privileged to have been able to lead trips. Again, as I said earlier in the presentation, going into the summer, I had no idea what to expect. And working with a company like Natural Habitat Adventures, I know that these protocols are being taken very seriously, both in their development and in their implementation. And it's been a new challenge for me, but it's really caused me to look at these trips in a different way. And I do feel very strongly that we're providing a product that far exceeds what we've been able to offer in the past. And I'm just very grateful to be a part of this company.
And Renata?
Yeah, I wanted to just thank everyone that was able to attend this webinar. We are so excited to be able to offer more and more departures, and being able or traveling at this period of time that we're in right now is a really personal decision. However, it's really important that you understand the steps that the company that you choose to travel with is taking, and it is a bit of an honor to be able to take the time to let you know how our trips have been going, and to say with confidence that we're really excited to be able to offer more trips in the upcoming months, and get back to where we were, just traveling internationally.
And Corbin?
Yeah, not to be redundant, but I kind of mirror the same sentiment that it's nice to be able to work for a company that really cares, and that we're making sure that all of these things are going into place. I try to keep my finger on the pulse with the industry in general, and just try to see what other companies are doing and how other people are traveling. And I have to say that what I've come across is that Nat Hab is doing the best here, and we're really taking these opportunities to not only make our trips viable during COVID, but it's kind of pushing us towards an ultimate goal of ours, which is to improve these trips, whether that's with the outdoor meals, enhanced sanitation, whatever it is. Our trips are actually getting better, which I think is just really, really great, especially in a time when everything seems to be so dark. So yeah, thanks to you guys for being here and chatting over that stuff with me, and happy to work with you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I really do want to say I appreciate all the work you guys have done behind the scenes in planning and executing these trips. They went really well this year, so thank you so much for being here to explain all that you did and all that goes into our trips. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. We have another webinar in about 30 minutes, so for those of you who've registered, I will see you there. If not, I will see you tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We do have this webinar recorded, so we will have the replay available on our website soon. And if we did not get to your question today, I do apologize, but we are always here for you. So give us a call at 800-543-8917 or email us at info@nathab.com, and we are happy to address any questions you have. So thanks again for being here. And with that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah.